Let me start with something really important. If social work isn't always what we want it to be, then that's not the fault of frontline managers or social workers or academics. The pressures and the distortions come from much bigger systems, from things like national policies, political ideologies, and from the structural expectations. Those are the forces that push social work into ways of working that sometimes feels rushed, fragmented, transactional. So when I'm proposing slow social work, this is not a criticism. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's more of an invitation. It's an invitation to think about social work at its very best. The kind of practice that we've all seen, the kind of practice that stays with us. We know when we've done it, and it's the kind of practice that stays with people even when the social work has kind of left the relationship. When we look closely at those moments, we notice something that they all share, and I believe what they share is they were slow. They were patient. They were about presence. They were about being with and not just doing the job. We can't avoid the fact that social work is political. Every decision about how resources are distributed, who gets supported, how systems are managed, it's all shaped by politics. And pretending that social work is somehow neutral only hides that truth. And if social work is political, then how we choose to practice, whether we rush or whether we create space, is also a political act. To practice slowly, to resist the push to reduce people to data points or transactions, is to say that people matter more than metrics, and I know that you know that. The system, though, demands those things. Time, attention, and relationships are political commodities, and to give them is to take a stand against the system. I just want to bring in Alistair Campbell's model here. Alistair Campbell has this model called outcome, strategy and tactics, and it's a simple way to understand how we frame our work. Outcome is, what do we want to achieve? Strategy is the broad approach that gets us there, and tactics are the practical things we do day to day. Now, if we map current social work onto this model, the outcome is often defined for us by government agendas. It's political. Reduce risks, cut costs, move people through the systems. Strategies then become about compliance, about audit, about performance measures, about jobs done in a particular time frame. And tactics, the actual work, end up being, or having to be, fast, transactional, about gathering information and meeting the targets that we've been given. And this leaves very little space for presence, listening, and reflection. But what if we flip this? What if we reimagine outcome, strategy, tactics through the lens of slow social work? The outcome would be people experience dignity, humanity, and genuine change. We'll get to the reducing of risk through that. We might even get to cutting costs because we might find strengths in the person or in their environment. And we will gather information in order to do that. But the outcome we're trying to achieve is not that. The outcome we're trying to achieve is that people have experienced dignity and humanity and genuine change. So the strategy that gets us that is prioritising relationships and trust and co-creation with service users and communities. And the tactics are we practice presence. We sit with people, we listen deeply, we allow time, and we resist rushing to solutions. This shift doesn't ignore risk or budgets or accountability, but it reframes them. Those things still happen. It says that the real outcome is not the ticked box, but the life improved. The strategy is not the speed and the throughput, but the depth and the connection. And the tactics are not forms and meetings, but the tactics are slowing down enough to see the whole person. And I know we do some of this. But the system forces us in another direction. That's why we need to be political. So this, I know this won't sound alien to you, this idea of sitting with people. You know, because we've all seen it, we've all done it, we've all been involved in it, but we still get pushed in another direction. Think about Think about times when you or your teams, maybe if you're a manager, have really made a difference. Think about the families or the individuals who still remember their social worker years later, and they are out there, genuinely out there. And that's not because of the form you filled in. That's not because of the assessment you wrote. That's because time was given and words were spoken and presence was offered to them. That's what slow social work points us back to. And I know we haven't lost it completely, but we operate in a system that pushes us away from it. So I know this is not a fantasy. I know this is a practice that we already know is possible, and we already do when it is possible. But we work in a system that often makes it impossible. That's why social work has to be political. So for managers and practitioners, I suppose, and academics, the challenge is not to magically change the national system. None of us can do that overnight, but we have to tinker away at it, push away at it. But it's to create microclimates or micro environments where slowness can survive as often as possible. It's given permission to ourselves often, or to our teams, to go for depth, to measure what matters. And I talk about these things in the book. To ask not only, whether we met a deadline or not, important as that is, things have got to be done in a timely fashion, but also, did we connect? Did we listen? And did we give time? And you will be, but the system pushes us in another direction. Because if we accept that social work is at its best when it's slow, then our leadership role, personal leadership and leadership of teams and directions, is to carve out and protect space for that slowness even in the midst of wider pressures, and then to push back against those pressures and not just say, well, it's just the way social work is. Well, it's not the way social work should be. So this is a proposition that social work should be slow. Not sluggish and inefficient, but deliberate and present and human. And taking that stand is political, and taking that stand is radical. And that's familiar to all of us, because we've all done social work at its best, I'm sure. So the question is, how do we build organisations, strategies and tactics that allow that kind of practice to thrive? And that won't be easy, but it starts with a conversation. And that's the conversation that I want to try to keep alive.